Daniel Sterling considered himself a man of routine. Coffee at 6:05 a.m., news headlines until 6:30, shower, dress, commute. His job as an architectural data analyst demanded precision, a trait mirrored in his tidy apartment and predictable life. He managed his baseline anxiety with schedules and logic. But logic offered no explanation for the intricate network of scars he discovered one Tuesday morning. They weren't souvenirs of a forgotten accident, they felt deliberate, etched onto his skin while his memory slept. This discovery wasn't just about unknown wounds, it was about lost time, a terrifying blank space where something incomprehensible had happened. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The steam billowed around Daniel, clinging to the glass shower door like a shroud. Tuesday. Mid-level report due Friday, dinner with Sarah's parents Saturday, nothing out of the ordinary scheduled. He hummed tunelessly, reaching for the soap. His life was a carefully constructed edifice of predictability, a bulwark against the low hum of anxiety that always vibrated beneath the surface. Lately, a project deadline had amplified that hum, tightening his shoulders and leaving a metallic taste in his mouth, but nothing unmanageable. Nothing a good night's sleep couldn't typically sand down. As he lathered his chest, his fingers snagged on something unfamiliar. A raised line. He paused, brow furrowing. Probably scratched himself moving boxes over the weekend. But then his fingers traced another, parallel to the first, then another intersecting it at a sharp, unnatural angle. He shut off the water, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic pounding in his ears. He grabbed a towel, rubbing furiously at the condensation on the bathroom mirror. The reflection that stared back wasn't entirely his own. His torso, usually pale and unremarkable save for a smattering of faint freckles, was now a roadmap of healed incisions. They weren't the ragged tears of an accident or the angry red welts of an allergic reaction. These were intricate, fine, silvery lines, some no thicker than a hair, crisscrossed his skin from collarbone to hip bone. Many were surgically straight, ending in near-invisible points, while others branched out in complex, almost geometric patterns. A few, jarringly, were slightly jagged, as if the hand holding the instrument had momentarily slipped or hesitated. They looked disturbingly designed. He turned, twisting to see his back in the secondary mirror. More lines, forming a complex lattice that followed the contours of his muscles. His upper arms bore similar, though less extensive, markings. They weren't fresh. They looked healed, perhaps weeks-old judging by the faded, silvery appearance, yet somehow recent. There was no soreness, no lingering tenderness, just the profound wrongness of their existence. He touched one near his ribs, the skin smooth but undeniably altered. When did this happen? How? Panic clawed its way up his throat, cold and sharp. He stumbled out of the bathroom, dripping water onto the pristine hardwood floor, a detail his meticulous mind registered with detached alarm. He needed to reconstruct. Yesterday. Monday. Work had been stressful, yes. He remembered the afternoon meeting, the annoying drone of Henderson from accounting. He remembered picking up Thai food on the way home, eating alone because Sarah, his girlfriend, was visiting her sister out of state until Wednesday. He remembered watching some bland documentary, feeling tired, the usual pre-deadline tension coiling in his stomach. He remembered going to bed. And then? Nothing. A complete, terrifying void stretched between the memory of turning off his bedside lamp and the shock of the shower discovery. At least 24 hours, maybe closer to 36, were simply gone. Erased. His eyes darted around the apartment. No broken windows, no forced locks. His keys were in the bowl by the door, wallet on the nightstand. The clothes he presumed he'd worn yesterday, his usual work slacks and button-down shirt, were folded neatly on the hamper in the bedroom closet, not tossed aside in a struggle. No bloodstains on the carpet, no overturned furniture. Nothing suggested violence or intrusion. He grabbed his phone. Call log, Henderson at 3:15 p.m. Monday. Sarah at 7 p.m., their usual check-in call. A food delivery confirmation email. Then silence. No outgoing calls, no incoming he hadn't answered, no texts sent or received after roughly 8 p.m. Monday. His web history showed work-related sites, the Thai restaurant menu, the streaming service. Nothing unusual until it just stopped. He sank onto the edge of his bed, his reflection a scarred stranger in the polished surface of his dresser. He felt physically fine. No headache, no dizziness, no nausea. Just this profound disconnect, This chilling sense of violation coupled with the absolute absence of memory. It wasn't like forgetting where he put his keys, it was like an entire section of his life had been surgically excised, leaving only these cryptic marks behind. He dressed numbly, his fingers tracing the lines through the fabric of his t-shirt. They felt like whispers of an event he couldn't comprehend. He couldn't go to work. He couldn't pretend this was normal. He needed answers, but the questions themselves felt insane. How do you ask someone how you got scars you don't remember receiving during a time you don't remember living? The neat, ordered world he'd built felt fractured, the foundations shaken by an invisible earthquake. The reflection in the mirror wasn't just marked, it was haunted by an absence, a gaping hole where yesterday should have been. The anxiety he usually kept leashed was now a roaring beast, pacing the cage of his ribs, rattling the bars. And the worst part? He didn't even know what he was supposed to be afraid of. The sterile white of the examination room felt both appropriate and mocking. Daniel sat on the crinkling paper, the thin gown doing little to hide the road map etched onto his skin. Dr. Evans, a man whose calm demeanor usually reassured Daniel during his infrequent checkups, entered with a polite smile that faltered slightly as Daniel explained his situation, his voice tight with forced composure. "So, Mr. Sterling, you're saying these marks appeared sometime between Monday evening and this morning? And you have no recollection of that period?" Dr. Evans peered closer at Daniel's torso, his expression shifting from polite concern to genuine perplexity. He gently touched the edge of a scar near Daniel's shoulder. "They appear well healed. Not inflamed, no sign of recent trauma. The precision is unusual." Daniel nodded mutely. "I know it sounds crazy. I checked everything. No break-in, no sign of a struggle. I just woke up like this. And I lost a day. Maybe more." Dr. Evans hummed thoughtfully, tapping his pen against his clipboard. "Well, let's rule out the basics. Any new lotions, detergents? Exposure to unusual plants or chemicals?" Daniel shook his head. "Any history of sleepwalking? Blackouts?" Negative again. The doctor shone a penlight at the scars, then examined Daniel's back and arms with the same focused intensity. "Dermatologically, it doesn't present like typical shingles, certainly not an allergic reaction pattern I recognize," Dr. Evans mused, more to himself than to Daniel. "The linearity, the almost geometric arrangement on your back. It's highly atypical. Given the accompanying memory loss, we could be looking at something neurological or psychological. A dissociative fugue state, perhaps? It's rare, but individuals can sometimes engage in complex behaviors, even travel, with no subsequent memory. It's possible, though admittedly unlikely given the nature of these marks, that they could be self-inflicted during such a state." Daniel recoiled internally. Self-inflicted? These precise, intricate lines? It felt profoundly wrong, yet the doctor's clinical detachment made the suggestion sound almost plausible, which was somehow worse. Or, Dr. Evans continued, perhaps there was an unreported incident. A fall, an accident you don't recall? Though again, the nature of the scarring doesn't align well with typical injury patterns. He ordered standard blood work, checking for toxins, infection markers, metabolic abnormalities, but his tone suggested he didn't expect to find much. The results, when they came back later that day, were completely normal. "Daniel," Dr. Evans said, his voice softening slightly, adopting a tone usually reserved for delivering difficult news gently. "The physical presentation is baffling, I'll admit. But the significant memory loss is the most immediate clinical concern. Combined with the strangeness of the situation, I strongly recommend a consultation with a psychiatrist or a neurologist specializing in memory disorders. Sometimes extreme stress," he added, glancing at Daniel's chart noting his profession and history of managed anxiety, "can manifest in unexpected ways." Daniel felt a cold wave of despair wash over him. Dismissed. Not maliciously, perhaps, but dismissed nonetheless. The doctor saw memory loss and bizarre physical symptoms and defaulted to the psychological. It was logical, conventional, and utterly unhelpful. He left the clinic feeling more isolated than ever, the sterile scent of the office clinging to him like a bad omen. That evening, Sarah arrived back early, alerted by Daniel's strained, evasive phone call. He'd tried to downplay it, but his inability to answer simple questions about his Tuesday had set off alarm bells. Seeing the scars in person, however, shattered her composure. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Daniel. Oh my God, what happened to you?" Her initial reaction was pure, visceral fear for his physical safety. She traced one of the lines on his arm, her touch feather-light, as if afraid he might break. He explained everything again, The blank period, the lack of memory, the pristine apartment, the doctor's inconclusive findings and gentle push towards psychiatry. As he spoke, he saw the shift in her eyes. The initial horror at the physical marks slowly morphed into a deeper, more unsettling fear. The fear wasn't just for him anymore, it was, subtly, a fear of what was happening to him. Maybe the doctor's right? She ventured hesitantly, twisting her hands in her lap. Maybe you were just so stressed. You don't remember doing this? Or something happened, and your mind blocked it out? Sarah, look at them, Daniel insisted, pulling up his shirt again, desperation making his voice raw. Does this look like something I did to myself? Or like some random accident? It looks precise. Intentional. But who would do this? And why? And how could they do it without you remembering anything? Her questions were logical, the same ones swirling in his own head, but hearing them from her felt like an accusation of instability. They spent the next few days trying to retrace his steps, a futile exercise in grasping at smoke. They called the tight place, he paid cash, no one remembered him specifically, checked his building security footage, showed him entering Monday evening, never leaving until Tuesday morning after the discovery, looked at photos from the preceding weekend, visited his usual haunts. Nothing. The blankness remained absolute, a solid wall his memory couldn't penetrate. Sarah's attempts to help felt increasingly like attempts to manage a fragile psyche, her reassurances laced with a pity that stung. The physical evidence was undeniable, etched onto his skin, but without a memory to anchor it, he was adrift in a sea of disbelief, even from the person closest to him. The scars weren't just on his body, they were beginning to scar his connection to the world. The scars refused to remain passive reminders. They began to assert their presence in unsettling ways. It started with an itch, deep and persistent, localized beneath the intricate patterns on his torso. It wasn't the normal itch of healing skin, it felt deeper, almost neurological. It would flare up at odd times, during a quiet moment at his desk, jolting him awake at night, a maddening sensation that scratching only seemed to aggravate, spreading a tingling awareness across the network of lines. Then came the visual changes. Under certain lighting, or perhaps triggered by stress, the scars seemed to subtly shift in color. Sometimes they appeared fainter, almost blending into his skin, while other times they seemed to darken, taking on a slightly bruised, purplish hue, making the patterns stand out in stark relief. He found himself spending unnerving amounts of time in front of the bathroom mirror, obsessively tracking these minute changes, cataloging them in his mind like data points. He'd trace the lines with his fingertips, feeling the smooth, raised texture, trying to decipher their meaning, their origin. It became a compulsion, a disturbing feedback loop of observation and anxiety. Beyond the itching and visual shifts, other physical sensations began to manifest, always localized around the scarred areas. Phantom touches, like cold fingertips brushing against his skin when nothing was there. Sudden, sharp cold spots blooming on his back or ribs, making him shiver involuntarily even in a warm room. Occasionally, he'd feel tiny, subcutaneous twitches or tremors directly beneath the longest scars, as if minuscule muscles were spasming just under the surface. These sensations were fleeting but deeply unnerving, reinforcing the feeling that the scars weren't just marks on him, but had somehow integrated into him. Sleep offered little respite. His dreams remained fractured, but sensory fragments began bleeding into his waking hours, more insistent now, more specific. It wasn't memory, not yet, but raw, untethered input. The overwhelming smell of antiseptic, sharper and colder than any hospital he'd ever been in, would sometimes flood his senses, making him gag. Other times, it was the faint, almost subliminal sound of rhythmic humming, a low electronic thrumming that seemed to vibrate in his bones, often accompanied by a series of faint, precise clicks, like delicate machinery. Most disturbing was the recurring tactile hallucination, the distinct sensation of cold, smooth metal pressing firmly against his skin, specifically along the paths of the scars. These fragments would surface without warning, while microwaving leftovers, reading an email, talking to Sarah, causing waves of nausea and disorientation, making the ground feel unsteady beneath his feet. Driven by a desperate need for tangible evidence, for anything to break the wall of memory loss and external skepticism, Daniel began searching his apartment with an almost forensic intensity. He went beyond checking for signs of a break-in, he started looking for things that were subtly wrong, out of place from the blank period. Tucked away at the back of his junk drawer, beneath old chargers and tangled earbuds, he found it, a small, unfamiliar tool. It was metallic, cool to the touch, about the size of a pen. One end was smooth and cylindrical, while the other terminated in a bizarrely shaped tip, a tiny, multifaceted point surrounded by what looked like miniature, retractable filaments. It resembled no tool he owned or recognized. Holding it sent a jolt of unpleasant familiarity through him, the cold metal echoing the phantom sensations on his skin. Near the entryway, partially hidden beneath the edge of the welcome mat, he noticed a small patch of dried mud ground into the carpet fibers. It wasn't the usual city grime. This was darker, richer soil, embedded with tiny flecks of something that looked like crushed quartz or crystal. He never went hiking, rarely ventured off paved paths. Where could it have come from? He meticulously went through his wallet again. Tucked behind an old business card, he found a receipt he'd initially overlooked. It was from a 24-hour gas station convenience store, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. on what must have been the Tuesday morning he couldn't remember. The location was over 30 miles away, in a semi-rural area on the outskirts of the city he had absolutely no reason to visit, especially not in the middle of the night. He'd purchased only a single bottle of water and a pack of high-caffeine energy mints. Finally, while straightening his bookshelf, a place he hadn't touched in weeks, a bookmark fell out of a dense textbook on urban planning theory he hadn't cracked open since college. It wasn't one of his. It was a simple strip of stiff, gray cardstock, completely blank except for a small, cryptic symbol printed in the lower right corner, 3 interlocking circles, with a single dot in the center of the overlap. The symbol meant nothing to him, yet looking at it sent a fresh wave of that deep, internal itching across his back. These weren't memories, but they were something. Physical whispers from the lost time. A strange tool, foreign soil, an inexplicable detour, a cryptic symbol. Each clue was small, fragmented, meaningless on its own. But together, they formed the first cracks in the smooth, terrifying blankness of his missing day, hinting at a journey far stranger and more deliberate than a simple dissociative fugue. They were breadcrumbs leading somewhere. And the physical sensations, the itching, the twitches, the phantom cold, they felt less like random neurological misfires and more like his own body trying to tell him something, trying to remember what his mind could not. Armed with the fragmented clues, the precise, patterned scars, the antiseptic smell, the humming sound, the weird tool, the cryptic symbol, the gas station location, Daniel plunged into the murky depths of the internet. His search terms grew increasingly specific, moving far beyond standard medical inquiries. He started with surgical scar patterns, unexplained intricate scarring, then ventured into darker territories, fringe medical procedures, underground body modification, biohacking neural pathways, alternative therapies, memory loss. He scrolled through endless pages of dubious wellness blogs, conspiracy theory forums, and unsettlingly graphic body modification communities. Much of it was noise, alien abduction tales, government mind control paranoia, extreme piercing and implant logs. But occasionally, nestled deep within obscure threads or hidden behind password-protected forum sections, he found echoes. Vague references to mnemic ablation or psychic parasite removal. Coded discussions about somatic recalibration that involved precise subdermal work. Mentions of practitioners who operated outside conventional systems, offering radical solutions for intractable psychological issues, crippling anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorders, persistent intrusive thoughts, even profound grief. The descriptions were often veiled, couched in pseudoscientific jargon or New Age spiritual language, but the peripheral details sometimes resonated chillingly. Mentions of sterile, hidden environments. The smell of ozone or specific sterilizing agents. The use of sonic frequencies or patterned electrical stimulation during procedures. He found one fleeting post on a defunct biohacking forum describing a theoretical technique for targeted neural pathway pruning that involved intricate subdermal mapping. The poster used the term scar mapping. Another thread, quickly deleted but caught by an archive site, discussed the ethical gray area of procedures that included induced temporary amnesia as a way to bypass patient fear or procedural trauma. The symbol from the bookmark appeared sporadically, often associated with groups discussing consciousness cleansing or entity detachment. It was never explicitly defined, dismissed by skeptics as nonsense, but its recurrence felt significant. He wasn't finding direct answers, just unsettling reflections, like distorted images seen through water. The lack of concrete information was maddening, yet the resonance of these scattered pieces fueled his obsession. He spent hours hunched over his laptop, the glow illuminating his increasingly strained face, ignoring calls from Sarah, letting work deadlines slip. His sleep, already disrupted by the itching and phantom sensations, deteriorated further. The fragmented sensory inputs began coalescing into more structured nightmares. He dreamt of lying on a cold, metallic table in a room bathed in a harsh, Blue-white light. Masked figures moved around him, their faces obscured, their actions purposeful and efficient, not overtly threatening but chillingly impersonal. He could hear the low, pervasive humming sound from his waking fragments, feel the vibration through the table. He felt the sting of injections, the precise pressure of a cold instrument tracing patterns on his skin, the exact patterns he now bore. In these nightmares, there was a sense of something being drawn out of him, a feeling of lightness mixed with violation, followed by a wave of chemical drowsiness and the final clicking sound before oblivion. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding against his ribs, the specifics dissolving like smoke, but the visceral feeling of the procedure, the cold, the humming, the detached precision, the sense of something taken, lingering like a toxic residue. His behavior inevitably pushed Sarah further away. His explanations became wilder, referencing obscure online forums, cryptic symbols, and procedures that sounded like science fiction. He showed her the strange tool, the mud sample he'd carefully bagged, the gas station receipt, the bookmark. To him, they were crucial pieces of a terrifying puzzle. To her, they looked like the desperate collections of a man losing his grip on reality. "Daniel, please," she pleaded one night, her voice strained with worry and exhaustion. "You need help. Real help. Not this." She gestured vaguely at his laptop, open to a forum discussing energetic parasites. "Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe you need to talk to a therapist, a psychiatrist. They won't understand." Daniel shot back, frustration boiling over. "They'll just drug me or tell me I imagined it. This happened, Sarah. Someone did this to me. Or I let them." The last part hung in the air, unspoken until now, a terrifying possibility sparked by the forum posts about voluntary, radical treatments. His boss called him in for a meeting, expressing concern about his declining performance, his distractedness. Daniel mumbled apologies, unable to explain the real reason for his preoccupation. He felt reality fraying at the edges. The conventional world, represented by Dr. Evans, Sarah, his boss, saw him as potentially unwell, broken. But Daniel was becoming convinced that something invasive, deliberate, and deeply strange had occurred during those lost hours. He lacked proof, the kind of proof the rational world demanded, leaving him stranded in a paranoid echo chamber, his own body the site of an unsolvable crime. The scars itched, reminding him the mystery wasn't just in his mind, it was etched into his flesh. The disparate clues finally clicked into place, not through a sudden revelation, but through obsessive cross-referencing. Daniel had spent days mapping the gas station location, scouring satellite images of the surrounding semi-rural area, cross-referencing property records, and plugging addresses into the fringe forums alongside the cryptic symbol in terms like somatic recalibration or anemic ablation. Most searches led nowhere, dead ends and digital ghosts. But then, one combination yielded a hit. A user on a heavily encrypted forum, discussing alternative locations for intensive psycho-spiritual retreats, mentioned an area remarkably close to the gas station Daniel had inexplicably visited. The user referenced a specific, defunct business park off an old highway, a place built during a minor tech boom decades ago, now mostly deserted. In a follow-up, coded message, the user posted a string of numbers that Daniel initially dismissed as random. But looking again, he realized they weren't random, they were GPS coordinates. When he plugged them into a map, they pinpointed a specific building within the derelict business park. And chillingly, when he searched for the symbol from the bookmark alongside the name of the shell corporation that owned that particular lot, information he'd painstakingly dug up through county records, he found a single, archived cache page from years ago, a rudimentary website advertising holistic mind-body harmonization, featuring the three interlocking circles symbol. The address. The symbol. The proximity to the gas station. It was a tangible link, the first solid thread leading out of the labyrinth of his confusion. The building itself looked innocuous on the satellite view, a low-slung, windowless structure set back from the road, surrounded by overgrown asphalt and skeletal trees. According to records, it was zoned for light industrial and storage, but had been vacant, officially at least, for over 5 years. A strange feeling washed over Daniel, distinct from his baseline anxiety or the panic he'd felt upon discovering the scars. It was a pull, an almost magnetic compulsion to go to that location. The rational part of his brain screamed warnings, it was potentially dangerous, likely fruitless, possibly delusional. But another part, deeper and more primal, felt an undeniable urge. It felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability, as if the scars themselves were resonating with the place, or as if a post-hypnotic trigger, planted during the lost time, was finally activating. He had to go. He wouldn't find peace, wouldn't understand the marks on his skin or the hole in his memory, until he confronted the source. He told Sarah his plan, hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction as the compulsion solidified. Her reaction was immediate and visceral fear. "No, Daniel. Absolutely not," she pleaded, her eyes wide with alarm. "You can't just go poking around some abandoned building based on conspiracy theories you found online. What if someone is there? What if it's dangerous? This is how people get hurt, or worse." "Sarah, I have to," he insisted, his voice low but firm. "Don't you see? This is the only lead I have. Everything points there. The gas station receipt, the symbol, the coordinates. It all lines up. Maybe I won't find anything, fine. But maybe I'll find answers. Maybe I'll find out what happened to me. Or maybe you'll find nothing and just confirm everyone's fears that you're unwell," she said, the word hanging heavy between them. "Please, Daniel. Let's go back to Dr. Evans. Let's find a specialist. There has to be a rational explanation." "Rationality hasn't helped," he countered, the frustration making his voice sharp. "Rationality tells me these scars shouldn't exist and my memory shouldn't be gone. Something happened in that blank space, Sarah, and I think it happened there." Their argument escalated, circling the drain of her fear for his sanity and his desperate need for validation. In the end, she couldn't stop him. He saw the resignation in her eyes, the widening gulf between his reality and hers. It hurt, but the pull towards the building was stronger. He spent the rest of the day preparing, the compulsion overriding his fear. He gathered the clues, printouts of the forum posts, the gas station receipt, the strange tool, which he tucked into his jacket pocket, its cold weight a disturbing comfort, a photo of the bookmark symbol. He charged his phone fully, enabling location sharing, a small concession to Sarah's terror. He packed a small flashlight, a bottle of water, and debated bringing something for protection before deciding against it. Attracting attention was the last thing he wanted. He felt a strange mix of dread and adrenaline. He was walking towards the heart of his own mystery, stepping off the map of his known life into the terrifying blank space. He didn't know what he would find, but the alternative, living with the unanswered questions, the maddening itch, the haunting fragments, was no longer bearable. The defunct business park felt like a graveyard of ambition. Cracked asphalt, weeds reclaiming the parking lots, faded signs for companies that likely folded years ago. Daniel parked his car a discreet distance away and approached the building identified by the coordinates on foot, the late afternoon sun casting long, skeletal shadows. Building 7C. It was set further back than the others, partially obscured by overgrown bushes. The exterior was gray, featureless concrete, with only a single, heavy steel door visible and no windows. Faintly, beneath layers of grime and peeling paint near the doorframe, he thought he could make out the ghost of a symbol, 3 interlocking circles. A shiver traced its way down his spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. The door was unlocked. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing not darkness, but a dimly lit corridor. The air inside was cool, still, and carried the distinct, sharp smell from his sensory fragments, antiseptic, ozone, and something else, something faintly metallic and organic, like old blood scrubbed clean. It was far stronger here, almost overpowering. He hesitated, then stepped inside, pulling the door almost shut behind him. The corridor stretched forward, lit by intermittent, flickering fluorescent panels overhead. Doors lined both sides, plain and unmarked. Disturbingly, despite the building's apparent dereliction from the outside, the corridor floor was relatively clean, free of the dust and debris one might expect. It felt maintained, in a minimalist, clandestine way. As he moved deeper, the low humming sound began, almost subliminal at first, then growing steadily louder. It wasn't machinery noise from adjacent buildings, it was emanating from within this one, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of his shoes. It matched the sound from his nightmares perfectly. He pushed open the first door on his right. It led to a small, stark room containing only a chair, a table, and what looked like sophisticated monitoring equipment, now dark and inactive. An observation room? The next door revealed a similar setup. Further down the corridor, he found a larger room. The antiseptic smell was strongest here. Inside, the humming intensified. It looked like a makeshift, yet disturbingly well-equipped, operating theater. A central table, cold, metallic, just like in his dreams, dominated the space. Trays held arrays of strange, gleaming instruments, some resembling conventional surgical tools, others bizarrely specialized, including several that looked unnervingly similar to the multifaceted tool in his pocket. Cabinets lined one wall, some glass-fronted, revealing neatly labeled containers holding unidentifiable liquids and biological samples. There were dark, ambiguous stains on the floor near the table, stains that scrubbing hadn't entirely removed. High-frequency lighting fixtures hung overhead, currently off, but undeniably the source of the harsh, blue-white light from his nightmares. Panic tightened its icy grip, but the compulsion to understand pushed him onward. In an adjacent smaller room, more like an office, he found shelves filled with binders and file boxes. Most were unlabeled or marked with simple codes. He pulled one down at random. Inside were case files. Names and identifying details were heavily redacted, reduced to initials and case numbers, but the descriptions were chillingly familiar. Patient AR7, presented with debilitating obsessive thoughts, resistant to conventional therapy and medication. Underwent somatic pathway realignment, level 3. Post-procedure notes indicated successful mnemic buffering and resolution of primary complaint. Attached was a diagram, a complex pattern of lines mapped onto a featureless outline of a human torso and back. The pattern was horrifyingly, undeniably familiar. It was his pattern. He frantically pulled down another binder. Patient LK12, severe generalized anxiety, panic attacks. Procedure, parasitic energy extraction via mnemic ablation. Outcome, residual somatic echoes reported, itching, localized cold, but core anxiety significantly reduced. Memory partition stable. Another diagram, another intricate pattern of scars, different from his, but clearly related in style and precision. He found dozens of files, each documenting individuals plagued by severe psychological distress, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, profound grief, who had apparently sought out this place. The language was a disturbing mix of pseudoscientific jargon and almost spiritual terminology. Neural resonance cleansing, limbic friction reduction, extraction of discordant emotional waveforms. The diagram showed the scar patterns weren't random, they were specific maps, apparently tailored to the ailment being treated, charting the paths of whatever intervention had been performed. He found a drawer containing more tools, including one identical to the one he'd found in his apartment. He picked it up, the cold metal strangely resonant in his hand. This wasn't an attack site. It wasn't a place of random violence or bizarre experimentation on unwilling victims. It was a clinic. A fringe, underground, terrifyingly real clinic offering a radical, unverified, and dangerous-sounding procedure. And the evidence, the sheer volume of meticulous documentation, pointed to one horrifying conclusion: the patients, marked and memory wiped, had come here seeking it. The scars weren't the injury, they were the surgical footprint of the cure. The antiseptic smell, the humming, the cold table, the masked figures from his dreams, it was all real. It was a procedure. And the final, sickening realization began to dawn: he hadn't been dragged here. He had walked in willingly. He stood frozen in the file room, the binder heavy in his hands, the hum of the building vibrating through him. His gaze fell upon a specific diagram in the file for patient GC29, a complex starburst pattern centered over the sternum, disturbingly close to a cluster of his own scars. Something about the precise angles, the cold geometry of it, snagged on a hidden tripwire in his mind. Then, carried on the stale, antiseptic air, came a faint, lingering chemical undertone, perhaps a residue from the anesthetic, or the mnemic buffering agent mentioned in the files. That smell. It was the final key. The lock didn't just click open, it shattered. Memory flooded back, not gently, but in a violent, overwhelming torrent. The blank space wasn't empty anymore, it was filled with a truth more horrifying than any imagined assault. He remembered the crushing weight of anxiety that had become his constant companion over the past year, escalating beyond the usual manageable hum. It wasn't just work stress, it was a deeper, more pervasive dread, a specific, spiraling obsessive thought about failure, about losing control, that conventional methods hadn't touched. He remembered the sleepless nights, the gnawing fear that paralyzed him, making his meticulous routines feel like a crumbling dam against an overwhelming flood. He remembered the desperation. He remembered stumbling upon those same French forums he'd recently rediscovered, not as a detective, but as a supplicant. He remembered finding coded references to a radical procedure, a permanent solution, a reset for minds trapped in destructive loops. He remembered the clandestine emails, the encrypted chats with a faceless facilitator who promised relief, who spoke of energetic parasites feeding on fear, who assured him the technique was revolutionary, precise, and safe, provided strict protocols were followed. He remembered the consent. The chilling moment he agreed, driven by a fear so profound that the risks seemed negligible compared to the ongoing torment. He remembered being told the memory wipe was a crucial part of the healing, mnemic ablation, they called it, designed to prevent the psyche from dwelling on the procedural trauma or the extracted element, allowing for a clean slate, a true fresh start. The scars, they'd explained, were merely superficial markers of the deep internal pathways that had been realigned or cleansed. Necessary byproducts. He remembered the journey. Driving late at night to the remote gas station for the specific brand of electrolyte water and caffeine mints listed in the pre-procedure instructions. Finding the nondescript building in the dark. The sterile waiting room, the calming platitudes offered by a figure whose face remained indistinct, perhaps masked even then. And he remembered the procedure itself, the memories now sharp and visceral. Lying on the cold metal table, the blue-white light too bright. The low, bone-deep humming that seemed to loosen his thoughts. The masked, efficient figures, practitioners, not attackers. The sting of the local anesthetic, then the deeper, stranger sensation as the specialized tool, the one he now held a copy of, traced its path across his skin. Not painful, precisely, but profoundly violating. He remembered the feeling of something being drawn out, a psychic weight lifting, mingled with a terrifying sense of emptiness. He remembered the final injection, the chemical coolness spreading through his veins, the facilitator's voice calmly stating, "The buffering agent is now active. You will awaken refreshed, the dissonance removed. You will not recall this process, only the relief." Then the clicking sound, the hum fading, and the world dissolving into the absolute blackness he'd woken from. The weight of self-knowledge crashed down on him. He hadn't been a victim in the way he'd imagined. He was a participant. His own fear, his own desperation, had led him to this sterile, terrifying room, to submit to this clandestine violation. The scars weren't symbols of an attack, they were receipts for a transaction he had willingly, desperately made. He stumbled back into the main operating room, the recovered memories swirling with the present reality. Was anyone here now? The place felt recently used but currently empty. Had they moved on? Did they operate sporadically, leaving minimal trace? Or was there some automated system, some unseen observer? He half expected a hidden speaker to crackle to life, offering a calm, clinical follow-up, reminding him that his resurfacing memories were an unfortunate side effect, urging him to focus on the benefits. But there was only silence, save for the persistent hum. The horror wasn't an external confrontation. It was internal. It was the devastating realization of his own complicity, the chilling understanding of the extreme measures his own mind had driven him to. He looked down at the scars on his arm, no longer mysterious, but now imbued with the terrifying weight of his choice. Daniel fled the building, bursting out into the fading daylight, gasping for air that didn't reek of antiseptic and forgotten consent. He leaned against the cool concrete exterior, the recovered memories churning in his stomach like poison. The truth wasn't liberating, it was horrifyingly complex. He hadn't been randomly attacked, he had paid, metaphorically and likely literally, though that memory remained hazy, likely wiped along with the rest, for a dangerous, unproven procedure performed by faceless practitioners in a clandestine facility, all because his carefully managed anxiety had finally overwhelmed his rational defenses. The scars were a permanent, intricate tattoo of his desperation and compromised agency. He drove home numbly, the hum from the building seeming to echo in his ears. Explaining this to Sarah felt impossible. How could he articulate the depth of the fear that had led him there? How could he admit he had willingly subjected himself to something so extreme, so violating, and allowed his memory to be wiped? When he finally tried, later that night, the words came out haltingly, sounding even more unbelievable now that they contained the element of his own consent. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from fear for him to a kind of appalled pity, tinged with a new, unbridgeable distance. The man she knew, the rational, meticulous Daniel, seemed to have harbored a desperation she couldn't comprehend. The revelation didn't mend the fractures between them, it cemented them. Their relationship, already strained, felt irrevocably altered, haunted by the ghost of his secret fear and the extreme measures he'd taken. But what about the original problem? The crippling anxiety, the obsessive thoughts he'd sought to excise? As the days turned into weeks, Daniel had to admit, it felt different. Quieter. The specific obsessive loop that had plagued him seemed gone. Blunted. But the relief wasn't clean. It was replaced by a strange numbness, an emotional flattening in certain areas, as if the procedure hadn't just removed the parasite but had also shaved off parts of his personality, his capacity for certain joys or sorrows. Was this the cure? A hollowed-out piece? And the scars? They remained. They still itched occasionally, a phantom reminder. Sometimes, late at night, Tracing the complex lines on his torso in the mirror's reflection, he still felt those faint, subcutaneous twitches beneath the longest incisions. He knew how he got them now. He knew why he had consented, recalling the suffocating grip of the fear he'd wanted gone at any cost. But new questions arose, colder and more persistent than the old anxiety. What, exactly, had been removed? Was it just a psychological construct, an energetic parasite as the practitioners claimed? Or had they taken memories, personality traits, pieces of his soul? Had the procedure truly worked, or had it merely buried the problem deeper, leaving him vulnerable in new, unforeseen ways? Or worse, had the French procedure, in its invasive breaching of his mind and body, invited something else in? Were the scars not just entry points for the extraction, but anchors for something new? He looked at his reflection, touching a particularly intricate scar near his heart. Beneath his fingertip, he felt it again, a faint, familiar, rhythmic twitch just under the skin, like something small and foreign, quietly waiting. The relief he'd paid for felt terrifyingly fragile, the price etched permanently onto his skin, a map of a transaction whose final cost remained terrifyingly unknown. Enjoyed this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.